Welcome to American Overcoming Stories, the channel where true courage, grit, and impossible survival become unforgettable stories. If you believe in the human spirit, in real heroes who defy death itself, make sure to subscribe and join our mission to bring their voices to life. Today's story is not just about war, it's about sacrifice. It's about a man who fought with his body destroyed and his soul unshaken. This is the true story of Roy Benavidez, a soldier who was shot, stabbed, and left for dead, yet still rose to save his brothers. The helicopter hovered over a jungle clearing in Vietnam, its blades kicking up dust, blood, and silence. Medics jumped out, scanning the chaos for any signs of life. Among the twisted bodies and smoking debris, one figure lay still, limp, drenched in blood, eyes half open but unseeing. To the world he was dead, a lifeless soldier, unrecognizable beneath the grime and wounds. They were ready to move on, but as one medic knelt beside him, preparing to zip up the black body bag, something unexpected happened. The corpse spit blood, weakly, instinctively. As if refusing to let go, the medic froze. "He's alive!" someone shouted, just barely. But that was all he needed. That body was Roy Benavidez. And what no one around him knew yet was what that body had done in the last 6 hours. The bullets, the blades, the fire, the impossible. What lay on the ground wasn't just a soldier. It was the embodiment of something few will ever understand. Honor. Loyalty, brotherhood. Roy wasn't supposed to be there that day. He wasn't even assigned to the mission. But when he heard the call that men were down, surrounded, bleeding in the jungle, he grabbed a knife, his gear, and jumped on the first helicopter he could find. And once his boots hit the ground, he entered hell willingly, alone. Before the jungle, before the war, there was a barefoot boy running through the dusty roads of South Texas. Roy Benavidez was born in 1935, in a world that didn't expect much from him. His father died when Roy was just 2 years old. His mother followed a few years later. Orphaned before age 8, he was raised by relatives alongside 8 other children in a small wooden shack with no electricity, no running water, and no promises. The world outside wasn't kinder. Roy was of Mexican and Yaqui descent, and every corner he turned reminded him of it. Signs in stores read, "No Mexicans allowed," and school didn't offer much escape. He dropped out by 7th grade to work in the fields, picking sugar beets and cotton to help feed his family. But even then, something about Roy stood apart. He had fire in his eyes and silence in his suffering. He was small, but no one doubted his toughness. He knew what hunger felt like, what rejection sounded like, what it meant to be invisible, but instead of letting it break him, he used it to build something stronger. Every hardship became a brick in the foundation of a soldier not yet born. When he turned 17, Roy lied about his age to join the Texas National Guard. He wanted to serve, not for medals, not for glory, but because he believed that even someone with nothing could still stand for something. Years later, he transferred into the U.S. Army. That's when he found his true home among the warriors. The discipline, the structure, the challenge, it all clicked. And when he learned about the special forces, about the Green Berets, it was as if destiny had finally called him by name. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't sound like one either, but deep down, Roy Benavidez was already preparing for a war that would ask more of him than any man should ever be asked. And somehow, he would answer. Roy Benavidez had finally made it. Green Beret, U.S. Army Special Forces, a title earned, not given, carved through sweat, blood, and silence. He was strong, focused, and fiercely loyal. When he was deployed to Vietnam for the first time, he walked into the jungle with a quiet confidence, but no amount of training could prepare him for what lay beneath the leaves. It was during a patrol that Roy stepped on a landmine. The blast didn't kill him, but it nearly took everything else. He was evacuated in agony, both legs badly injured. Back at the hospital, doctors gave their verdict without hesitation. You'll never walk again. The army began preparing. His discharge, his career, his dream, his purpose, all slipping away. But Roy wasn't wired for surrender. Every night while the hospital slept, he would drag himself out of bed. Using only his elbows and sheer will, he began retraining his body from scratch. He refused painkillers, refused sympathy, refused to let a label define him. He pushed through screams, through tears, through hopeless moments when his legs betrayed him. Inch by inch, muscle by muscle, he stood, and when he could finally walk again, without aid, without assistance, he walked straight back to the army. "Send me back," he said. They didn't believe him at first, but his determination, his discipline, his refusal to quit, it was impossible to ignore. Roy rejoined active duty. He wasn't just healed, he was reborn. Hardened by fire, sharpened by pain. He wasn't the same man who left the battlefield months earlier. He was stronger, quieter, and in the depths of his soul, he knew something else was coming, something darker, something that would test everything he had ever believed about loyalty, faith, and sacrifice. And when that call came, he would not hesitate. It was May 2nd, 1968. The air was heavy, the jungle hotter than usual. Roy was stationed at Loc Ninh, a quiet moment between storms. But storms in Vietnam never waited long. Suddenly, a frantic radio transmission pierced the static. "Team under fire, surrounded, request immediate extraction." A 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team had been dropped into the jungle. They'd walked straight into a nightmare. Hundreds of enemy fighters, an ambush from all sides. They were being cut down. One chopper had already tried to get them out and was shot down on approach. Time was bleeding out fast. Roy wasn't on the mission. He hadn't been called. No one asked him to act, but he didn't need permission. He heard that men he trained with, men he loved like brothers, were dying. And in that instant, he moved. He grabbed a medic bag. He didn't take a rifle, no helmet, no heavy armor, just his fatigues, a knife, his radio, and the fire inside him. He ran toward the helipad. Pilots looked at him confused. "Where are your orders?" "I don't have any," he said. "Then what the hell are you doing?" "Getting my men." Moments later, he was airborne, crouched in the belly of a helicopter, looking down on a green inferno. Gunfire lit the jungle like lightning. Smoke curled from the treetops. Bodies, friend and foe, littered the ground. There was no safe zone, no perimeter, just hell. The pilot hesitated. "We can't land." "Get me close," Roy shouted. "I'll jump." And he did, into chaos, into bullets, into fire. As his boots hit the earth, he didn't look back, didn't count odds, didn't wait for backup. There were men out there screaming for help, and he intended to find every single one of them. This wasn't strategy. It wasn't protocol. It was love. Raw and fearless, a promise whispered in war. No one gets left behind. And from that moment on, the jungle would never be the same. The moment Roy hit the ground, the air exploded around him. Bullets ripped through trees. The dirt beneath his boots jumped with every impact. He zigzagged toward the downed helicopter where the first team had fallen. Smoke stung his eyes. Screams pierced the chaos. He moved anyway. He reached the chopper, dragging wounded men from the wreckage, dodging bullets as he pulled them to cover. One soldier's leg was hanging by a thread. Another was unconscious. Roy used his own body as a shield, crawling on elbows, dragging, lifting, whispering, "You're not dying today." And then a bullet struck his face. Blood poured from his cheek and jaw, but he kept moving. Moments later, a grenade exploded near his back, sending shrapnel through his spine and legs. He collapsed, screaming through clenched teeth. But Roy got up. He couldn't walk straight, but he staggered, limped, carried others across his shoulders. He ran through machine gun fire, coordinating airstrikes with one hand while dragging the wounded with the other. He recovered classified documents from a fallen officer, and when a North Vietnamese soldier lunged at him with a bayonet, Roy caught the blade with his bare hands. They struggled. Roy wrestled the man to the ground and used his own knife to survive. His body was giving up, but his spirit refused. By the time reinforcements arrived, Roy had sustained 37 separate wounds: bullets, shrapnel, stab wounds, broken ribs, crushed vertebrae. He'd been shot in the head, the stomach, the shoulder, the legs. His uniform was soaked in blood, most of it his own. Still, he kept going. He loaded the last of the wounded onto the evacuation chopper, limping, gasping, falling to his knees. He collapsed beside the bird, eyes fluttering, body shaking, and finally, darkness. Roy had done the impossible. He saved 8 men, alone, and in doing so, he redefined what it meant to be a soldier, not just a fighter, not just a warrior, but a brother willing to bleed for love, for loyalty, for the soul of a promise. The jungle took nearly everything from him, but not his faith and not his mission. Roy Benavidez lay motionless beside the evacuation helicopter. His eyes were shut, his pulse shallow, his body, a battlefield in itself, was torn by bullets, shrapnel, burns, and blade wounds. The medics couldn't find a heartbeat. His breathing was almost imperceptible. They covered him in a poncho. To them, he was gone. They loaded the helicopter. The other wounded were tended to. The dead were wrapped for transport. Roy's body was among them, silent, still, forgotten for a moment in the rush of war. One medic knelt beside him, preparing to zip the black. Body bag closed, and that's when it happened. Roy spit. A weak spray of blood hit the medic's face. The medic jumped back, startled. "He's alive!" someone yelled. A second later, hands were moving fast. Oxygen, bandages, pressure. The man they thought they'd lost wasn't ready to go. Not yet. The helicopter lifted off, heading back to base. Inside, Roy drifted in and out of consciousness. He heard voices but couldn't speak. He felt pressure, but no pain. His mind floated through memories, his childhood in Texas, his family, the faces of the men he'd pulled from the jungle. It all played like a dream soaked in fire. At the field hospital, doctors took one look at him and braced for the worst. No one expected him to survive the night, but he did. Then another, and another. The nurses couldn't understand it. Medically, he shouldn't be here. His organs had shut down. His body had nothing left to give. But Roy was never just a body. He was will, spirit, refusal. He couldn't speak for a week. Tubes fed him. Machines kept him alive. But when his throat cleared just enough for his first words, he looked at a nurse and whispered hoarsely, "Did they all make it out?" He didn't ask about medals. Didn't ask about himself. He only asked about them. Because Roy Benavidez had gone to that jungle knowing the price, and he would have paid it 1,000 times over. But for now, he'd bought something even more precious. More time, more life, and the right to finish what he started. Surviving the jungle was only the beginning. Roy Benavidez spent months in recovery. Dozens of surgeries, physical therapy sessions that pushed him to the edge, nights where pain was his only companion, but none of it broke him. What hurt most wasn't physical, it was silence. At first, there were no headlines, no ceremonies, no recognition. His heroism was buried in bureaucracy. The mission had been so chaotic, so deadly, that the details were tangled in confusion, and the one officer who had witnessed Roy's full sacrifice had died in the rescue. Without a living eyewitness, the army declined to issue the Medal of Honor. It wasn't personal, it was procedural. But for Roy, it felt like a shadow over the memory of the men he saved. He hadn't done it for glory, but now their story risked being forgotten. So he waited, quietly, honorably, until years later, another soldier who had survived that day, after believing Roy had died, came forward with a full account. That changed everything. While the paperwork was reviewed and reconsidered, Roy didn't sit still. He began to speak at churches, schools, and prisons. Not about killing, not about war, but about faith, about discipline, about making a choice every day not to give up. He never positioned himself as a hero. He simply showed others what resilience looked like. His voice was calm, even when his body still carried pain. The man who once crawled through fire now stood before students and inmates, looking them in the eye and saying, "There are no free rides. You want something in life? Earn it." He never bragged about the wounds, never listed his medals. What mattered to him wasn't how people saw him, but what they remembered and what he hoped they'd never forget. Was the price of brotherhood. On February 24th, 1981, Roy Benavidez stood in the East Room of the White House. He wore his dress uniform, polished shoes, and a chest full of ribbons. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was the weight of the moment. Before him stood President Ronald Reagan, who held the Medal of Honor in his hands. Reagan looked at the crowd, then at Roy, and said, "If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you wouldn't believe it." The room laughed. Roy didn't, because every second of that unbelievable story was real, soaked in blood, forged in agony, and driven by something deeper than duty. He accepted the medal with grace, but refused to wear it like a crown. To Roy, it didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to the brothers he carried, the ones who didn't come home. That day, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about them. From that moment on, Roy made the medal his tool, not his trophy. He began traveling across the country, speaking to thousands, students in failing schools, inmates in dark prisons, veterans battling invisible wars. Wherever he went, he carried two things, his story and his purpose. He spoke not as a hero, but as proof. Proof that one person can endure hell and come back stronger. That a kid from the cotton fields of Texas could stand before presidents not because he was lucky, but because he never quit. Roy's words weren't flowery or rehearsed. They were raw, direct and honest. He told people to stay in school, to honor their families, to never forget where they came from, and always, always to remember those who sacrificed so others could rise. He once said, "I don't need a statue. I don't need a street with my name. Just give me a classroom and 5 minutes with your children." That was Roy's real mission, not war, but hope. Roy Benavidez lived far longer than anyone expected, long enough to see generations rise, long enough to shake the hands of children who knew his name not from textbooks, but from the way their parents spoke it, with awe. He passed away on November 29, 1998, at the age of 63. The wounds that never fully healed had finally taken their toll, but he didn't leave in silence. His story had already become legend, not just among soldiers, but among anyone who had ever faced the choice to stand or surrender. At his funeral, Green Berets lined the walkway. Veterans saluted, civilians wept. He was buried with full honors, the Medal of Honor shining beside him, a symbol of what one man can do with nothing but a body broken and a heart unbreakable. Roy once said, "I died in that jungle. I just didn't know it yet. But the truth is, he never truly died. His legacy lives on in every soldier who refuses to leave a brother behind, in every young person who chooses courage over comfort, in every person who hears his name and remembers that heroism isn't loud, it's loyal." Roy didn't ask to be remembered as a warrior, he asked to be remembered as a servant, and so we do. Not because of the medal, not because of the wounds, but because when the world needed a miracle, one man stood up and became one. If Roy Benavidez's story moved you, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below and share what his sacrifice meant to you. Hit the like button if you believe the world still needs to remember soldiers like him, and subscribe to American Overcoming Stories to keep these voices alive, not just as stories, but as legacies. Because true heroes never die, as long as we keep telling their truth.